Another win for the good guys. So it's official. The nightmare for the Flynn family is finally over. You know, I'm very, very happy for them. I'm a bit upset. I feel like he never needed to be pardoned in the first place. You know, he didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to show you this video where I just completely go through everything that happened to him. I mean, from them tricking him and trying to make him believe that the conversation that he was having with the FBI, like when they went in there, they didn't present it as an interview. They were just like, hey, you know, we're just buddies. Like we're just having like a colleague discussion like that. And they strategized behind the scenes to make him feel comfortable, you know, and it was awful. And then the 302s, okay. The 302s, those are how they record the FBI interviews. They basically just write them down. It's handwritten notes instead of recording a video, you know, because, you know, we have technology and stuff, but no, they don't do that. Instead, you know, they just write stuff down. And then you'll see, and I show you the documents. They changed his 302s again and again and again and again. And Lisa Page is one of the people who is helping edit these. And they just changed it. And you have some versions of the 302 of this written report where Flynn answers one way and others where he answers another way. It is a disgrace. It is a disgrace. But I tell you what, there's something that I just figured out. You know, there were reports when he was speaking to the FBI agents, there were 3 times where he went to the window and he looked out and he said, "What a beautiful black sky." And it was a beautiful, clear day. And for the longest time, I could not figure out what that meant. But all I knew is, hey, like if like this big, huge intel guy is saying some weird cryptic stuff like that, you know, like I would get out of there. Like that would scare me. I was like, oh no, something's going down. And it finally occurred to me what he was saying. He was telling them, he was warning them before the inauguration even happened that a storm was coming. Okay, so before I play the Flynn video for you, I just wanted to let you know of some updates that have happened since I made the original video. First off, when I said that Flynn didn't do anything wrong, like I was not joking. So they charged him for lying about sanctions. But they have finally released the transcripts of the phone calls that he had with Russian Ambassador Kislyak. And turns out they never discussed sanctions. So the FBI said that he lied to them and he did talk to the Russian ambassador about sanctions, except when you look at the phone call, they never talk about sanctions. The DOJ dropped the case against him. But then the judge, Emmett Sullivan, who's a real piece of work, was like, you know, no, like, let's just keep this going and going and going and going forever and ever and ever and ever. Even though, you know, you're completely innocent. I can't even, like, I can't even. But see, here's the issue. And this is how they tried to confuse people with what happened. See, what General Flynn was actually talking about with the ambassador was expulsions. Expulsions aren't sanctions. So no, they didn't talk about sanctions. They talked about something else. And you're like, well, why did he plead guilty? Watch the video. Watch the video. It's this amazing story where they have been coming after him for years and years and years before this even started. Michael Flynn was a highly decorated lieutenant general in the United States Army. Everyone thought he was super awesome. Everyone, that is. Except for the people on Team Hillary. Team Hillary knew they needed a pound of flesh to give the Russian collusion narrative some teeth, and so they set their sights on the beloved general. Obama hated General Flynn for a myriad of reasons and forced Flynn out as the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and into an early retirement at the age of 56. Obama had a juvenile, ignorant, and just plain wrong view of the threat that radical Islamicist terrorism posed. Obama's official narrative was that the enemy was on the run.
Obama wrongly thought that killing Osama bin Laden spelled the end of al-Qaeda. In 2012, Obama's National Intelligence Council even reported that al-Qaeda no longer posed a threat to America. After viewing some of the daily presidential briefings, General Flynn realized that the information on terrorism coming in from the military intelligence sources was being watered down, and General Flynn blamed Susan Rice in part for the dilution. General Flynn knew that the 2006 execution of Abu Musab al-Zakari didn't stop al-Qaeda in Iraq. The core of al-Qaeda remained after Osama bin Laden was killed in 2011, and al-Qaeda in Yemen continued to be a threat long after Anwar al-Awlaki was put down in 2011. These guys were all connected by an extreme religious philosophy that transcended international borders. If you cut one of the heads off of the snake, another would grow in its place. Worse yet, the intel that General Flynn was receiving was showing that instead of the enemy being on the run, they were actually rapidly expanding. The instability caused by the 2011 Arab Spring served as fertilizer for the smaller terrorist organizations that were scattered across the Middle East and Africa, and according to General Flynn's calculations, from 2004 to 2013, the number of radical Islamist terrorist groups had almost doubled and occupied a significantly larger global footprint.
Mr. President, according to my calculations, ISIS is going to be a big problem for us in the future.
Oh, you're fired. Another reason Obama hated General Flynn was because General Flynn was a vocal opponent of Obama's Iran deal. The Iran deal was one of the worst examples of foreign policy in the history of ever. It gave the Iranians literal plane loads of U.S. tax dollars and lifted sanctions on them, helping them to fund terrorism all over the world, all while allowing them a path to make nuclear weapons. The only way the Iran deal made sense was if it was just a cover for a kickback scheme for Obama and his buddies. Finally, General Flynn posed a threat to Obama because he knew where the bodies were buried. As the head of Obama's Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, General Flynn had the level of security clearances and the access to the kinds of information that could take people down. The setup of General Flynn started way back in 2014. In 2014, Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, decided to create the Cambridge Security Initiative with the help of his good friend and highly paid FBI informant Stefan the Walrus Holper. Dearlove is the guy that counseled his former subordinate Christopher Steele to funnel the lies in the Steele dossier to the FBI, and on July 7th of 1983, the New York Times reported that Stefan Holper was the spy that infiltrated President Carter's administration and passed policy information back to the Ronald Reagan camp. The intelligence community really gave Holper the code name the Walrus because, well, I guess even the deep state at times has a sense of humor. The Walrus lured George Papadopoulos to London under false pretenses, where Azra Honeytrap Turk posed as the Walrus's assistant so she could try to seduce Papadopoulos and get him to admit that he was in league with the Russians, which of course didn't work because it wasn't true. Then the Walrus himself tried unsuccessfully to get Papadopoulos to lie and say he was working with the Russians, but the Walrus just came off as a weird, sweaty, and bloated version of a bargain basement super discount Austin Powers. Anywho, on February 28th of 2014, Dearlove and Holper decided to have a fancy dinner party at Dearlove's home. The official purpose of the dinner was to promote the creation of the Cambridge Security Initiative, and they decided that General Flynn, who at the time was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA for short, should be the guest of honor. Dearlove was also friends with official MI5 historian and Cambridge professor Christopher Andrew. Dearlove and Andrew invited Andrew's Russian-born UK citizen grad student Svetlana Lakova to the soiree as well. During the dinner, Andrew pressured Lakova to talk to Flynn, and they had a brief public exchange. General Flynn left that evening with DIA official Dan O'Brien, and none of the other DIA officials raised any concerns. Andrew told Lakova to stay in contact with General Flynn, and she occasionally exchanged emails with him, but she copied or shared all of her correspondence with the general with Andrew. This combination of an innocuous dinner and infrequent email exchanges would come back to haunt both Flynn and Lakova more than 3 years later, because in March of 2017, the Walrus was deployed. The Walrus served as the anonymous source for numerous outlandish fake news stories claiming that Svetlana Lakova was a Russian spy and she was having an affair with General Flynn on the orders of Russian intelligence.
I'm not a Russian spy, and I have never worked for the Russian government. I believe that General Flynn was targeted, and I was used to do that.
On December 15th of 2015, General Flynn attended a dinner in Moscow for RT, a Russian English language news channel that is currently the home of Larry King. Before he went to Moscow, General Flynn informed the DIA of his upcoming trip, and he attended a defensive briefing. The briefing alerted General Flynn to possible techniques the Russians might use to compromise him and prepared him for conversations in which he could potentially extract intelligence to help his country. General Flynn received close to $34,000 for his attendance, and he was seated next to Vladimir Putin. When General Flynn returned from Moscow, he was debriefed and provided the DIA with useful intel. Instead of thanking General Flynn for his service because he had successfully gathered information for America's intelligence community, the fake news media would later use this dinner as proof that General Flynn was a traitor to the country he so very dearly loved. On December 29th of 2016, President Obama imposed sanctions on Russia for election interference, which triggered Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak to call President-elect Trump's soon-to-be National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. The Obama team spied on that call, which, much to their disappointment, turned out to be a perfectly fine and normal conversation.
The counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign was named Crossfire Hurricane, but there was a second Crossfire investigation called Crossfire Razor that was solely focused on General Flynn. On January 4th of 2017, Crossfire Razor was ordered to be closed due to a lack of evidence.
So Flynn's under investigation in the summer of 2016, a counterintelligence investigation. The FBI found nothing. They didn't find an insufficient amount of evidence. They found no evidence, and they're about to close this investigation.
But 20 minutes after the document to close the case had been released, Peter Strzok ordered it to stay open. Strzok texted to an agent whose name has been redacted,
"Hey, don't close Razor. 7th floor involved."
The 7th floor was a reference to the upper echelon of the FBI's leadership.
The same day the Steele dossier, which contained lies about General Flynn, was published in full by BuzzFeed, which was on January 10th of 2017, Peter Strzok sent this text to Lisa Page.
"Honey bunny, I'm sitting here with Bill watching CNN. A ton more out. We're discussing whether now that this is out, we can use it as a pretext to go interview some people. Oh, Lisa, I love you so much."
For the next several weeks, Team Hillary held multiple meetings to brainstorm tactics they could use against General Flynn to interrogate him over his benign phone call that he had back on December 29th with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak.
Handwritten notes from Bill Priestap, the then counterintelligence director at the FBI, said, quote, "What's our goal? Truth/admission? Or to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired," unquote.
What we're seeing is a meticulously planned out scheme to try to get a 33-year combat veteran of the United States to say something that was inaccurate so that they'd have a basis to try to charge him with false statements or otherwise get him fired. They did not have a legitimate investigative reason for doing this. There was no criminal predicate. There was no reason to treat him like a criminal suspect. For years, a number of us have been arguing that this looked like a perjury trap. We're now seeing the paper trail start to catch up with what common sense has said for a long time.
Additionally, on January 10th of 2017, Clapper told David Ignatius at the Washington Post words to the effect of, "Take the kill shot on Flynn." 2 days later, the world became aware that Team Hillary committed a felony when they leaked General Flynn's December 29th phone call with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak to the Washington Post. Nothing illegal occurred during General Flynn's phone call, but the article questioned whether or not General Flynn had broken the law by violating the Logan Act. The Logan Act forbids citizens from negotiating with other nations on behalf of the United States without authorization. No one has ever been prosecuted under the Logan Act, and it hadn't even been used since 1852. The idea that an incoming national security advisor speaking with a foreign diplomat was some sort of crime was absolutely ridiculous.
But in fact, all of General Flynn's conversations with the Russian ambassador and everybody else were legal. So why did the FBI approach him? They knew what he said. They knew it was legal. The answer is they wanted to frame him, and they succeeded.
In an attempt to kill the Ignatius story, General Flynn stated that he had the campaign put out the response that he didn't discuss sanctions with Kislyak at all. That claim was later repeated by Vice President Mike Pence. General Flynn later admitted that this wasn't true, and ultimately he would resign a month later, stating, quote, "Unfortunately, because of the fast pace of events, I inadvertently briefed the Vice President-elect and others with incomplete information regarding my phone calls with the Russian ambassador," unquote. And Vice President Pence responded, quote, "I know what General Flynn told me, and I'm more inclined to believe it was unintentional than ever before," unquote. From court documents filed by General Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell, on January 23rd, the day before the FBI interviewed General Flynn, Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, FBI General Counsel James Baker, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Trish Anderson, Jen Boone, and David Bowditch strategized to talk with Mr. Flynn in such a way as to keep from alerting him from understanding that he was being interviewed in a criminal investigation of which he was the target. Right before the meeting, Lisa Page had texted Peter Strzok, "Oh, Pumpkin, I can feel my heart beating harder. I'm so stressed about all the ways this has the potential to go fully off the rails." The following day, at 12:30 p.m., McCabe called Flynn and asked him if it was okay for 2 agents to come by and talk to him in 2 hours. McCabe also told Flynn it was better if there were no White House lawyers present. Comey bragged on TV about how he deliberately discarded FBI and DOJ rules by not alerting the White House counsel's office that he was sending agents over to interview President Trump's national security advisor.
The FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official. You would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions and approvals and who would be there. And I thought it's early enough, let's just send a couple guys over.
It's extremely concerning. It's outrageous government misconduct. The agents deliberately calculated and met to plan and strategize how to ambush interview General Flynn without letting him know he was officially under any kind of criminal investigation, to keep him relaxed. And they wanted to be seen as allies when in fact they knew exactly what he had said in his conversations, and they intended to create a situation in which anything he said could be used against him later as a false statement without any warnings to that effect whatsoever.
If General Flynn was a gangbanger or a mafia guy, they would have sat down with him, they would have told him this is a criminal investigation, they would have identified themselves as FBI agents, told him the reason for the interview, told him he had a right not to answer questions, told him if he made false statements that could be grounds for prosecution. They would do all those things for a criminal.
Why did you treat him so differently from the way you did Hillary Clinton? Remember, she had a medium-sized law firm in the room with her. They gave the questions to her lawyers before they interviewed her, and they most assuredly told her there's a consequence for lying, none of which they did for Michael Flynn.
Peter Strzok and Joe Pienka were the FBI agents that were sent to interview General Flynn on January 24th of 2017. Following the interrogation, McCabe said that Strzok and Pienka didn't think that Flynn was lying during the interview.
And he did not tell them false information. Some of it may have been paused. It may have been nuanced. He did not lie. And indeed, the agents who actual 302s are available said he didn't lie.
According to General Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell, on January 30th of 2017, the DOJ, in an internal memo, cleared General Flynn of being a Russian agent, and the documentation existed that showed that then FBI Deputy Director McCabe ruled out Logan Act charges against Flynn in January or February of 2017. You may be asking, how did we go from everyone saying that General Flynn was telling the truth to General Flynn pleading guilty to one count of lying to the FBI? Well, General Flynn took a plea deal in part because he ran out of money and had to sell his home. Additionally, Rod Rosenstein authorized Mueller to go after his son, Michael Flynn Jr., who had a newborn baby at home. General Flynn was worried that his family would be SWAT-teamed, just like Roger Stone and Paul Manafort's families had been. So General Flynn fell on his sword to keep them all out of harm's way. And General Flynn didn't lie to the FBI. They just made it seem like he did. Peter Strzok and Joe Pienka recorded their version of what General Flynn said in an FBI summary memo that is called a 302. A 302 is an utterly ridiculous format that the FBI uses to record what happens in interviews and interrogations. Instead of recording conversations, because we have, like technology and stuff, FBI agents take notes of questions and answers and then go back and later turn those notes into a summary memo. This format is prone to human error, and if you testify to something other than their flawed recollection, you can be charged with lying to the FBI. Not recording interviews gives FBI agents the ability to make up whatever they want in order to frame people, and that is exactly what they did to General Flynn. First of all, the 302s were hidden from General Flynn's defense team, which violated the Brady Rule. The Brady Rule is a pretrial discovery rule that was established in 1963 by the United States Supreme Court in Brady v. Maryland. The Brady Rule requires that the prosecution must turn over all exculpatory evidence to the defendant in a criminal case. Exculpatory evidence is evidence that might exonerate the defendant. There were at least 6 versions of the Flynn 302. The original one, that should be dated around the same day as the January 24, 2017 interview, still has not been produced. Subsequent ones that have been produced are dated February 10th of 2017, February 11th of 2017, February 14th of 2017, February 15th of 2017, and May 31st of 2017. They changed his 302 again and again and again and again until it said exactly what they wanted it to. We know, thanks to court documents filed by Sidney Powell, that Peter Strzok and Joe Pienka's original handwritten notes taken during the interview didn't line up with the information in General Flynn's 302. Additional questions and answers that were not in the original notes were added weeks and months after the initial interview took place. And the government had also gotten Strzok and Pienka's notes mixed up.
They added a definitive statement that General Flynn did not say something that he had said, and another statement that he had elicited some responses to questions about Ambassador Kislyak, what he had said in response, and there's nothing in the notes that supports that whatsoever. It's made up out of whole cloth. I would encourage everyone to look at the exhibits for themselves.
On February 10th of 2017, the news broke, attributed to senior intelligence officials, that Mr. Flynn had discussed sanctions with Ambassador Kislyak, contrary to what Vice President Pence had said on television previously. Overnight, the most substantive changes were made to the Flynn 302. Those changes added an unequivocal statement that Flynn stated he did not, in response to whether Mr. Flynn had asked Kislyak to vote in a certain manner or slow down the UN vote. This is a deceptive manipulation because, as the notes of the agents show, Mr. Flynn was not even sure he had spoken to Russia/Kislyak on this issue. He had talked to dozens of countries. Second, they added, or Kislyak described any Russian response to a request by Flynn. That question and answer do not appear in the notes, yet it was made into a criminal offense. The typed version of the highly unusual deliberative 302 by that date already included an entire section from whole cloth that also serves as a criminal charge in the information and purported factual basis regarding Russia's response to any request by Flynn. The draft also shows that the agents moved a sentence to make it seem to be an answer to a question it was not. The final 302, dated May 31st of 2017, had even more additions. Notes by both agents state that Mr. Flynn does not remember making 4 to 5 calls to Ambassador Kislyak from the Dominican Republic, where he was on vacation, but that if he did so, it was because phone service was poor and he kept getting dropped. I don't remember making 4 to 5 calls. If I did, lousy place to call. The final 302 states the opposite. Flynn remembered making 4 to 5 calls that day about this issue, but that the Dominican Republic was a difficult place to make a call as he kept having connectivity issues. This dramatically demonstrates the wrong-headedness of allowing a 302 to create a federal felony. The notes provide no support for a chunk of the 302 that purports to provide a factual basis for the plea. 2 out of the 4 alleged false statements in the statement of offense are based on what the agents claim Mr. Flynn said or did not say about the response of the Russian ambassador on 2 separate issues. Even if we assume the skimpy, vague, and ambiguous notes correctly represent anything the agents might claim, the notes provide no support for a question or an answer about the Russian ambassador's response, either to the UN vote or the sanctions. The FBI totally just kept making stuff up months and months and months after the initial interview. And guess who was helping with the editing? Lisa Page.
We knew from early on in 2017 that Michael Flynn did not lie to the FBI. We actually put that in our report. It didn't come out until 2018 after Flynn had already pled. And for some reason, it was redacted. We had to fight in order to get that unredacted. There were several of us as witnesses. We also told the highest levels of DOJ that we had been briefed by the FBI that Flynn didn't lie to the FBI.
He did not lie, and in fact, the FBI knew it. Michael Flynn was framed in order to get at Donald Trump. Sally Yates, James Comey, Peter Strzok, Andy McCabe all planned it. What you are watching play out in an American courtroom is one of the most disgraceful events in American criminal justice.
General Flynn resigned on February 13th of 2017, and the next day, Peter Strzok texted Lisa Page,
"Also, honey bunny, is Andy good with the F-302?
Page responded, "Launch the F-302, pumpkin." Almost simultaneously, David Loffman over at the DOJ called General Flynn's lawyers at the Covington and Burling law firm to pressure them to immediately file the work the Flynn Intel Group had done with Innovo BV under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA for short. Those FARA registration forms would later be used to pressure General Flynn to plead guilty because framing General Flynn for lying to the FBI wasn't enough for Team Hillary. They were going to threaten his family, go after his business and business associates with yet another frame-up job, this time using FARA. General Flynn co-owned the Flynn Intel Group with Bijan Rafikian, and his son, Michael Flynn Jr., worked there as well. The Flynn Intel Group was a lobbying firm, and on August 9th of 2016, they signed a contract to perform work for a Dutch-based company called Innovo BV. Innovo BV was owned by Akim Alptekin, a man with dual Dutch-Turkish citizenship. Arnett Fox, the lawyer that represented Alptekin, said, quote, "At the time Innovo hired Flynn Intel Group, Innovo represented a private sector company in Israel that sought to export natural gas to Turkey, and it was for support of its consulting work for this client that Innovo engaged Flynn Intel Group specifically to understand the tumultuous political climate at the time between the United States and Turkey." Unquote. It was General Flynn's understanding that they were working for a Dutch company that was representing an Israeli company. Lobbying for foreign businesses and governments is legal in America, and it happens every day. Depending on the type of work you are doing, you can register under FARA or the Lobbying Disclosure Act. According to Bijan Rafikian's lawyer, Robert Kelly, the Flynn Intel Group did not need to file under FARA because they were not dealing directly with a foreign country or a foreign government official.
General Flynn wanted to make sure he was doing everything on the up and up, and he disclosed his lobbying for Innovo BV to Congress by filing under the Lobbying Disclosure Act in September of 2016. On November 8th, General Flynn published an op-ed on the Hill website that was critical of Fethullah Gulen, a Muslim cleric that was living in self-imposed exile in Pennsylvania. It was believed that Gulen was the leader of a group that unsuccessfully tried to overthrow Turkish President Erdogan in 2016. The Flynn Intel Group received $530,000 for their work, and their contract with Innovo BV expired on November 16th of 2016. The Flynn Intel Group dissolved at the end of November in 2016 as General Flynn prepared to assume the position of National Security Advisor to then President-elect Trump. That should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. The Foreign Agents Registration Act was an overly broad, frequently ignored, and rarely enforced piece of legislation that was originally created in 1938 to combat Nazi propaganda. In the 50 years before Robert Mueller started prosecuting people for it like it was going out of style, only 7 people had ever been convicted under it.
The DOJ demanding that General Flynn file under FARA had the earmarks of a setup. Not only were his FARA forms almost immediately subpoenaed, but also he wasn't even given the regular simple FARA forms.
Normally, FARAs aren't prosecuted, you're right. But more than that is that when they receive, example, an issue from the FARA office to file a FARA, it's very simple. It's very easy to fill out. According to sources that I've spoken to, Flynn's FARA was so extraordinarily complicated. It was almost as if they had crafted the FARA to try to corner him into making a statement that wouldn't be correct. So that's something that they're looking into as well.
General Flynn was the kind of guy that liked to make sure that all of his I's were dotted and all of his T's were crossed. So he spent $170,000 to make sure that the paperwork was filed correctly.
The overly complicated FARA forms worked as planned, and there were 2 types of inaccurate information contained in them. The first form was a lack of information, which really wasn't that bad because to get busted for FARA, the government has to prove that you knowingly and intentionally violated the law.
The government had information that General Flynn didn't have regarding Alptekin, the owner of Innovo BV, having ties to the Turkish government, and instead of informing him, they let General Flynn file his FARA form with inaccurate information in it on March 7th of 2017. And not even a month later, on April 5th of 2017, the DOJ subpoenaed the FARA form.
Ask yourself, how does the government apparently know in advance about the extensive cooperation between a private company and the Turkish government that they're seemingly implying? But Flynn doesn't, ladies and gentlemen, because Flynn was being spied on the whole time. And I believe so was the company he was working for.
Speaking exclusively to Fox, Flynn's brother is reacting to the Mueller report and a key section indicating the retired general was already under FBI investigation during the 2016 presidential transition. Buried in Volume 2, the report states that investigators came across the FBI probe while examining, quote, Flynn's discussion of sanctions with Russian Ambassador Kislyak. Previously, the FBI had opened an investigation of Flynn based on his relationship with the Russian government. Flynn's contacts with Kislyak became a key component of that investigation. That timing matters because it was previously thought Flynn's phone calls with Kislyak that led to Flynn's termination for lying prompted the FBI case. Flynn's brother says the passage backs up the family's long-held concerns.
Because of his vocal criticism of the Obama administration, and specifically the intelligence community, which he came out of, my suspicion is that they were doing everything they could to trip him up and to trap him.
Accusing General Flynn of illegally working as an agent of Turkey made way better headlines than saying there was a legal disagreement over whether he should have filed under the Lobbying Disclosure Act or under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The fake news media also accused General Flynn of being part of some wackadoo plot to kidnap Gulen.
The second type of inaccurate information came at the hands of General Flynn's super high-priced law firm, Covington and Burling. You will never believe who was a partner at Covington and Burling. None other than Obama's self-professed wingman and former Attorney General, Eric Holder. Covington and Burling screwed up General Flynn's case so badly it seemed intentional. And I'm totally sure that deep state darling Eric Holder being at the helm of the company had absolutely nothing to do with that whatsoever. Covington and Burling's shoddy and incompetent errors were turned into a felony charge against General Flynn. And instead of fessing up, they hid the truth from him even after the special counsel team of all the groups of people told them to confess because they were involved in an outrageous and undeniable conflict of interest situation. In late 2016, General Flynn received an official inquiry letter from the FARA unit of the DOJ. His personal counsel and attorney for the Flynn Intel Group, Kristen Verdemey, said he should hire Robert Kellner, a well-known FARA expert at the internationally known law firm of Covington and Burling. On January 2nd of 2017, General Flynn told Covington and Burling that Bijan Rafikian wrote the first draft of the op-ed about Fethullah Gulen, and Rafikian separately confirmed the information with them as well. Robert Kellner soon wrote the FARA section a letter where he first made a fateful error. He stated that Mr. Flynn initiated the op-ed. Somehow, it morphed into a felony as construed by the special counsel's office. And Covington apparently never corrected or clarified it. On February 21st of 2017, Kellner repeated his error that General Flynn wrote the op-ed during a phone call with David Lothman, Heather Hunt, and others from the FARA unit. On March 7th of 2017, Covington and Burling filed the FARA forms, and the forms were almost immediately subpoenaed.
The evening right after Comey was fired on May 9th of 2017, Peter Strzok texted Lisa Page,
"Honey bunny, we need to open the case we've been waiting on, now while Andy's the acting director of the FBI."
Lisa Page responded the next morning,
"Oh, Pumpkin, we need to lock in redacted in a formal, chargeable way soon."
General Flynn's lawyer, Sidney Powell, believed the redacted name was General Flynn's. Robert Mueller was assigned as special counsel on May 17th of 2017, and in a secret memo, Mueller was given permission to investigate the Flynn Intel Group's FARA filings. Rod Rosenstein expanded the scope of the FARA filings investigation by authorizing Mueller to target Michael Flynn Jr. on October 20th of 2017.
Legal experts say prosecutors could be using the younger Flynn to pressure his father into divulging evidence about other high-level targets, including the president.
When someone's child is designated the subject of an investigation, that can put a lot of pressure on the ultimate target, the parent, to cooperate and to keep that child out of harm's way.
The government snatched all of Michael Flynn Jr.'s electronic devices and never returned them because he worked for his father's company. And you've got to remember that General Flynn had the understanding that he and possibly his son, who had a newborn baby at home, stood a strong chance of being SWAT-teamed because Mueller was doing this to other Trump team members. In a senseless and vindictive move, because he was already fully cooperating, Paul Manafort and his family were subjected to a raid where they patted his wife down in her nightgown at gunpoint. And of course, General Flynn didn't want this happening to his family. If the false statements in the FARA forms existed because General Flynn intentionally lied to his lawyers, then Covington and Burling may not have had much to worry about on their end. But the lawyers understood that the special counsel's office could deem the lawyers as co-conspirators instead of the government strictly operating on the theory of Flynn lied to his lawyers. The truth was, the lawyers botched the paperwork and their internal emails proved it. Covington's internal emails show it knew the false statements asserted by the government in the FARA filing were either false, made by someone other than Flynn, included because of Covington's own judgment calls, or were falsely crafted by the government and Covington simply stood down, acting in their own best interest. Covington loved the prestige of having a high-profile, world-famous client like General Flynn, and they weren't about to give him up. So, they began a campaign of covering their own butts so they didn't get in any legal trouble for their errors, even though it meant throwing their client, General Flynn, under the bus. By August 10th of 2017, Covington learned the special counsel's office was examining Covington's FARA filing for the Flynn Intel Group and Mr. Flynn. Covington began re-interviewing all Flynn Intel Group witnesses, redoing its entire FARA assessment, and even interviewing Robert Kelly, prior counsel for the Flynn Intel Group. Covington never notified Mr. Flynn of what it was doing, or, even more important, why. This escalated the conflict to a new level and rendered a simple resolution impossible. In late August 2017, Covington learned the special counsel's office was threatening an imminent indictment of Flynn Intel Group partner Bijan Rafikian for FARA violations. On August 30th, Covington emailed Mr. Flynn that there had been a development that was not urgent, but the lawyers wanted to chat. The Flynns, who were at their home in Rhode Island, replied that they were heading to dinner with friends. Robert Kellner and Stephen Anthony called them while the Flynns were en route. On that brief call, Kellner and Anthony relayed that Rafikian was facing imminent indictment on FARA charges. The lawyers mentioned a possible conflict that Kellner might have to testify, but they assured Mr. Flynn they would still be able to rigorously defend his case. But this was not just another unfortunate but manageable conflict of interest. By this time, Covington now knew there was a distinct possibility that one of Mr. Flynn's lawyers not only might have to testify against his former partner, Rafikian, but that he would be required to testify against his own client. That instantly created a non-consentable conflict of interest that only worsened. Although the Covington lawyers knew they were in a conflict of interest that should have led to their immediate withdrawal from the representation, they did not bother with a written or serious in-person explanation of the conflict. They did not insist that Mr. Flynn consult independent counsel to seek advice as to the wisdom of continuing to be represented by conflicted counsel. What had begun as a simple mistake in doing the FARA filing suddenly had the potential of exposing the Covington lawyers to civil or criminal liability, significant headlines, and reputational risk. The Covington lawyers were treating major problems like they were no big deal, and they were charging a stomach-churning amount for their lousy services. By August 14th, General Flynn's legal bill was already $726,000, and it would eventually top out around $5 million. Worse yet, the lawyers at Eric Holder's law firm weren't just handling General Flynn's FARA forms, they were also representing him in regards to his FBI interview charges. Instead of putting their clients' interests first, the Covington and Burling lawyers sought deals for themselves to limit their legal exposure instead of acting in the best interest of their client. On November 1st of 2017, the Covington team went to the special counsel's office to meet with Brandon Von Grack and Zainab Ahmad. Van Grack explained that the special counsel's office was looking at going after General Flynn on 3 separate issues. The first was FARA failure to register, the second was FARA false statements, and the third was false statements to government officials. During the November 1st meeting, the prosecutors themselves raised Covington's serious conflict of interest issue. Van Grack also told Anthony and Kellner, because Covington prepared the FARA registration, that would make you, Kellner, a fact witness.
Haven't thought about that one bit. Not one bit. And you most definitely will not find any emails to the contrary. But if we were to get to that point, we would litigate it very aggressively. We will be sure to tell General Flynn about this right away. Oh man, I can't believe they fell for that.
Additionally, in the November 1st meeting, Kellner mentioned statutory immunity only in passing, but he did nothing to make a stand for it or Mr. Flynn. Immunity would seem particularly appropriate to demand for a national hero like Mr. Flynn, especially in the light of the immunity grants freely awarded to at least 5 Clinton colleagues, including Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson, who destroyed evidence and Clinton emails. Not to mention the special counsel's office's decision not to prosecute others who lied to them, like Joseph Mifsud. Instead of pressing for an immunity deal, General Flynn's lawyers agreed to a proffer with a Queen for a Day agreement. Proffer or Queen for a Day letters are written agreements between federal prosecutors and individuals under criminal investigation which permit these individuals to tell the government about their knowledge of crimes with the supposed assurance that their words will not be used against them in any later proceedings. Quote, "You should think of a proffer session as a sneak preview in which you show the federal authorities what you can bring to the table if they cut a deal with you. Most proffers are made with the informal understanding that the government, if satisfied that you are telling the truth in the proffer session, will subsequently enter into a formal written immunity agreement or plea bargain agreement with you." Unquote. But the government may decide after you've given them all of your information that they're going to indict you anyway. And while the government cannot use your actual proffer session statements against you, it can use the information that you provided to conduct further investigations and follow-up leads. If those investigations and leads uncover new evidence, that evidence can be used to indict and convict you. Accepting a proffer arrangement instead of pushing for an immunity deal is yet another example of how Eric Holder's buddies victimized General Flynn. Covington and Burling sat on the conflict of interest information instead of telling General Flynn. Next, the Covington and Burling lawyers created talking points for their own dealings and called the special counsel's office on November 3rd of 2017 to arrange a deal for the firm instead of General Flynn. The special counsel team wanted to carve General Flynn up like a Thanksgiving turkey, and his own lawyers brought the carving knife to the dinner. Zainab Ahmad clarified that we're eventually going to want to talk about everything. That includes topics he has criminal exposure on. We aren't interested in Turkey right now. Anthony got the point that the firm's own FARA problem could be postponed from its perspective.
Cutting to the chase, are you going to ask him what is a novo, or do you intend to leave Turkey aside and talk about the types of things Van Grack was talking about?
Notably, Anthony limited his concern to the FARA issues, as to which he and Covington had exposure. This is not the work of an unconflicted counsel whose sole interest is protecting his client's rights and interests. Van Grack agreed to postpone discussion of issues as to which Covington had potential liability. He said, "What I would propose is, right now, we want to talk with your client for more than one day. Right now, initially, we are fine not talking about Turkey or the FARA piece because our investigation is not focused on Turkey/FARA." With that exchange, the false statements Mr. Flynn allegedly made to the FBI and all the Russia collusion issues were on the table first, where he had exposure. His own lawyers teed him up to discuss what the special counsel's office really wanted. Simultaneously, Covington took the FARA issues off the table, the only risk of problems for the firm. On November 4th of 2017, the Covington team met with General Flynn and convinced him to accept the crappy proffer deal. The proffering sessions were scheduled to take place on November 16th and November 17th of 2017. The Covington and Burling folks thought they were in the clear until they heard again from Van Grack of the Special Counsel's office on November 15th.
You know how we said that you didn't have to worry about talking about the FARA forms? Well, we lied! Ha-ha! Have Flynn ready to talk about it on Monday, November 20th.
Oh, fudge.
But he didn't say fudge. The next day, November 16th, the day of the first proffer, Van Grack spoke to Anthony.
You guys told Flynn about your conflict of interest, right?
We absolutely did not.
Yeah, so they totally lied to the government. Covington subjected Mr. Flynn to 2 full days of proffers on the issues on which he had the greatest exposure, while they hid their conflict of interest. Not only did they not object to any questions by the Special Counsel's office, they asked questions of him themselves to elicit answers the Special Counsel's office wanted, and they strongly encouraged him the second day to say what they deemed would get him through the proffer to the satisfaction of the Special Counsel's office. Over the weekend, they prepped General Flynn for several more days of proffers relating to FARA that were set to start again on Monday, November 20th. On Sunday afternoon, November 19th of 2017, at 1:13 p.m., Stephen Anthony finally sent Mr. Flynn a written request for consent to a potential conflict of interest that would have taken an ethics expert to comprehend. General Flynn didn't even see the email until the next day, 1 hour before his next proffering session was supposed to begin. The Covington and Burling lawyers made sure General Flynn didn't have the time to review the paperwork before he signed it. He had been told that his freedom and his son's freedom hung in the balance based on how these time-critical proffers went, and he would likely be indicted in days if the proffers didn't go well, which meant to the Special Counsel's office's satisfaction.
General Flynn went through 19 sessions with the Special Counsel, approximately 90 hours of torturous interviews.
The exchange of documents for General Flynn's plea deal began on November 27th of 2017, and before he even saw his own paperwork, Covington was gleefully planning its marketing campaign based on his guilty plea. In the meantime, exculpatory evidence had started to come to light, and they hid this from him as well. On November 30th of 2017, the day before Mr. Flynn's plea, the Special Counsel's office has said it disclosed to Covington that one of the agents who interviewed Mr. Flynn was being investigated by the DOJ Inspector General and had electronic communications that showed a preference for one of the candidates for president. The Special Counsel had known about the struck page texts for months, and they thought that this piddly description was sufficient enough to explain the scope of what the FBI lovebirds had said and done. But General Flynn's lawyers hid this information from him as well. The Special Counsel's office also said it disclosed that the agents said Mr. Flynn had a sure demeanor and did not give any indicators of deception, and that the agents had the impression at the time that Mr. Flynn was not lying or did not think he was lying. But Kellner and Anthony did not transmit this important information from the Special Counsel's office to Mr. Flynn. Whether an oversight or a deliberate strategy to keep Mr. Flynn from changing his mind about the plea, by that time, it would have exposed Covington to significant reputational risk at a minimum and scuttle their big marketing campaign. Covington counseled Flynn to sign a statement of offense it knew was false. General Flynn entered his guilty plea on December 1st of 2017. And the publicity poured in for Covington. American lawyer named Kellner and Anthony litigators of the week for Mr. Flynn's guilty plea, and emails of congratulations poured in.
Conveniently, the day after General Flynn entered his guilty plea on December 2nd of 2017, The Washington Post revealed the existence of the Strzok page texts.
We would not even be talking about Michael Flynn right now if it were not for the initial interviews he did with, wait for it, Peter Strzok, the very same Peter Strzok who had the insurance policy against the Trump presidency, the same Peter Strzok who said, no, we'll stop him, and most importantly, the same Peter Strzok who, when talking to his girlfriend 10 months into this investigation, after Michael Flynn's story had already been told, was saying, there's no there there. There's no evidence of collusion with Michael Flynn or President Trump or anyone else. This whole thing is a joke. He would have faced no legal jeopardy at all if he just wouldn't have pled guilty, because they would have never gotten a conviction with Peter Strzok as their star witness.
On March 13th of 2018, the special counsel's office began producing Brady material, and it became clearer and clearer that General Flynn had been set up. When it was time to prepare him for his sentencing hearing on December 18th of 2018, Covington and Burling still counseled him not to withdraw his guilty plea.
The federal judge in this case, Emmett Sullivan, began the proceeding by stating to the court, I can't think of a day when the court has accepted a guilty plea from a defendant that is not guilty, and that is not going to start today. He then walked the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn through several elements of the case, and he gave him multiple opportunities to withdraw the guilty plea, and Michael Flynn declined to do so.
In December of 2018, prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia charged Alptekin and Rafikian with acting as unregistered foreign agents, along with additional charges that stemmed from the Innovo BV work that was performed by the Flynn Intel Group. Alptekin lived in Istanbul and refused to come to the United States to stand trial. Rafikian, an Iranian-American, had to fight the charges in court. General Flynn requested that his sentencing be delayed because he was supposed to testify in the Rafikian case. And Kellner actually did testify against General Flynn's former partner. And he confessed in court that he's a never-Trumper. In June of 2019, a little before the Bijan Rafikian trial, Flynn finally fired his attorneys at Covington and Burling and hired Sidney Powell, a 6-foot-tall legal powerhouse with a reputation for exposing government injustice and corruption. Powell wears 2-inch spiked leopard print boots that she calls her attitude adjusters, and they aren't for adjusting her attitude. She uncovered most of the information in this video and is a true patriot and heroine. Previously, the government had told the court that General Flynn was not a co-conspirator in the Rafikian case. Next, the prosecutors asked Flynn to say that when he signed the Flynn Intel Group's FARA papers, he knew that there were lies in them. General Flynn refused, saying he only learned of the falsities in hindsight. General Flynn filled those papers out the best he could have with the information that he had at the time. Keep in mind that for the Foreign Agents Registration Act, prosecutors have to prove a knowing and intentional violation of the law, and both Rafikian and General Flynn consulted with lawyers during every phase of the efforts that they took to lobby legally. The government was trying to put Rafikian in jail for 10 years because after receiving legal counsel and registering with Congress, General Flynn co-wrote a newspaper article. Now make that make sense. When General Flynn refused to lie and say he knowingly violated FARA law, the deep state retaliated by canceling General Flynn's testimony, putting Michael Flynn Jr. on the witness list. They had the FBI contact his son, and they tried to brand General Flynn as a co-conspirator. Rafikian was convicted by a jury on July 30th of 2019, but Anthony Trenga, the judge in the Rafikian case, overturned the conviction because he saw through all the bullcrap.
People at the FBI at that time in the Department of Justice wanted one thing. They wanted to find a way to destroy Donald Trump because he wasn't supposed to be elected. But he beat them. And once they were beaten, they got angry. And then they got vindictive. And then they got vindictive by using the criminal justice system, weaponizing it, and John Brennan at the CIA and James Clapper followed through on their promised threat to figure out a way to get the people that they didn't want elected in order to make up for the fact that Hillary Clinton, had lost. This has become one of the greatest scandals in the history of our country, and the media is ignoring it.
Team Hillary fecklessly drove a stake through the heart of a man that honorably served his country for 33 years. with 5 of those years being spent in combat zones. They framed him, launched a giant smear campaign against him, threatened his family, persecuted his business associates, and caused him to lose his home as his legal fees skyrocketed past $1 million. You have just witnessed one of the most disgraceful chapters in American history. Justice is coming.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and please share it. You can help us continue to fight in the war against disinformation by donating at paypal.me/right-left-of-center. I'm River Wright from Right Left of Center, and if you're watching, you're probably right too.